Do you want affordable English classes with a qualified and professional English teacher? Well, you're in luck. Thinking in English now offers English classes. We have classes for intermediate, upper intermediate, and advanced level students which focus on developing your English quickly and effectively. Classes focus on key English skills, and the best part is you'll be studying with a small group of Thinking in English listeners. The price is just $10 a class with big discounts for Thinking in English members. Click the link in the description or go to my website thinkinginenglish.link to book now. Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level English learners. Today, let's learn about clichés and jargon, perhaps the most annoying parts of the English language. We'll look at some examples, discuss why clear English is important, and I'll give you some tips on how to remove clichés and jargon from your vocabulary. You can find the full transcript for today's episode for free over on the Thinking in English blog. Head over to my Instagram page and YouTube channel, both called Thinking in English Podcast. Leave a like, rating or review wherever you are listening right now, and join my conversation club, link in the description. Here is today's episode. Every few months, I like to read George Orwell's essay on politics and the English language. Orwell is one of the most respected writers of the 20th century. You may have read Animal Farm or 1984. And his essay introduces some valuable information and rules on how to make your English and your writing as effective as possible. Writing is a major part of my life. I spend most of my time writing, and writing for some unique and specific purposes. Half the time, I write podcasts and blog articles aimed at you guys, intermediate to advanced level English learners. Sometimes I write business emails aimed at American and international companies. And some of the time, I write advanced research papers concerning international politics, migration, and political theory. By reading Orwell's essay every few months, it reminds me of a few basic rules which I can follow to make my writing as clear and effective as possible. Although I write to different audiences and at different levels and for different purposes, I always try to make my language as clear as possible. I recommend you all to have a look at Orwell's essay. I'll link a free copy on the Thinking in English blog. But to summarize, Orwell gives us all 6 rules to follow when writing. 1. Never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you are used to seeing in print. 2. Never use a long word where a short one will do. 3. If it is possible to cut a word out, always cut it out. 4. Never use the passive where you can use the active. 5. Never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. And 6. Break any of these rules sooner than say anything outright barbarous. In my opinion, these rules are valuable for everyone, English learners and native English speakers. Over the past few months, I've spoken with a few companies and agencies who have been interested in working with Thinking in English. But every time they send me proposals, I wish they followed Orwell's rules. People tend to try too hard to sound intelligent and professional. Business people especially like to fill their English full of clichés, jargon, metaphors, idioms, and other useless and confusing words. Why? Because this is the language of business culture in America and around the world. But in reality, it just makes the language difficult to follow for people from outside of that industry. Today, I want to take a look at two types of language that cause a lot of confusion: cliches and jargon. I'll first explain the meaning of cliches and jargon and give you all some examples before talking about why you should be careful filling your writing with this type of expression. So, what is a cliché? Do you think outside of the box? Has anyone ever told you good things come to those who wait? Is the grass greener on the other side? I'm sure many of you have heard expressions and phrases like these before. Especially if you follow online teachers on Instagram or TikTok, you will have noticed that they love to talk about these kind of idioms. But these phrases are clichés. They are some of the most common clichés in the English language. And I would recommend you never use these clichés. I even found the 3 sayings on an internet article with the title, "Avoid these clichés at all costs." Now, I've said the word cliché a lot so far, but what exactly is a cliché? The dictionary defines a cliché as a phrase or opinion that is overused and betrays a lack of original thought. A slightly more understandable definition is a cliché is an expression which was once new, interesting and innovative, but today has lost all of its power and meaning due to overuse. This is exactly the thing Orwell was talking about when he wrote, "Never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you are used to seeing in print." Rather than copying already existing phrases, Orwell wants to encourage us to be creative and make new or innovative expressions. Take this example, "as cold as ice." This is used to mean extremely cold. But the cliché has been used so often, it's even a song title, it is now unoriginal and commonplace. Rather than imagining the feeling of ice and understanding how cold that is, we just think of the meaning as cold. We skip over it. Clichés are an easy and lazy way to describe something. If you are really in love with someone, you are head over heels. You shouldn't base everything on a first impression. You shouldn't judge a book by its cover. If you are in a bad mood, you woke up on the wrong side of the bed. And in business, they are everywhere. Value added, paradigm shift, put a pin in it. My door is always open. Failure is not an option. It is what it is. Pick your brain. There are hundreds of different business clichés I could mention. Even though these clichés are common, they have been used so much that they have lost their originality, creativity, and impact. If someone tells you their door is always open, is it really? No, it's a meaningless cliché people use in business. If someone asks to pick your brain, are they really going to pick your brain? No, they want to ask you a few questions. Clichés just make things more complicated, confusing, and difficult to understand. They make your English boring and repetitive. When we hear a cliché, we tend to ignore it. It has been used so often, we become uninterested in it. What is jargon? Orwell's 5th rule for writing was never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. What exactly is jargon? Jargon is the specialist and complex language used in specific professions, groups, and disciplines. Jargon allows people in such professions and groups to communicate clearly and precisely with each other. but it can be almost impossible to understand to people from outside that profession. Jargon is sometimes essential. Doctors and medical professionals use scientific and highly specialized vocabulary to talk to each other. Law is full of legal vocabulary. Last week I had a conversation about my website and didn't understand much about custom HTMLs and CSS classes. And I used a lot of jargon when writing myself as a researcher in the past. This vocabulary is necessary inside the industry. Rather than saying cancer, a doctor needs to know exactly what type of cancer is affecting a person. Instead of saying broke the law, lawyers need to know and describe exactly which law and how you broke it. Jargon allows this information to be communicated precisely. However, jargon can cause major problems when communicating with outsiders. It is often completely meaningless to people who are not in that profession or discipline. Let me give you an example. If you are a doctor, you might know the term myeloproliferative neoplasms. But I didn't until I just searched it on Google now. If a doctor told me that I had a myeloproliferative neoplasm, I would have no idea what they meant. But if they used a non-jargon term, like a type of blood cancer, I would understand instantly. And this is why we need to be careful using jargon. While jargon is essential to communicate complicated ideas and topics within your discipline, within your industry, it can make our language impossible to understand to people outside the industry. Orwell's rule was never use a foreign phrase, scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. And sometimes you need to use that technical term. Sometimes there is no alternative. There is no everyday English equivalent. And this wouldn't be useless jargon. That would be a technical term. But maybe there is an everyday English equivalent. This doesn't mean you need to fill your whole sentence with jargon. Instead, use a technical word and surround it with explanations and definitions. If there is a clear and normal way of explaining your message, use the common terms. Don't fill your emails or your proposals to people outside your industry with abbreviations and technical words and specific vocabulary that they might not know or understand. Just because you know a technical word doesn't mean everyone else does. You need to change your vocabulary and your English depending on who you are talking to. Two software developers discussing their jobs will have a completely different vocabulary than a software developer and a teacher discussing their jobs. The case for clear English. I believe we should try to make our English as clear and effective as possible. And one of the best ways to do this is to remove as many cliches and jargon from our everyday vocabulary. Writers like to use jargon to appear professional and intelligent. They believe that saying the complicated term makes them appear better or superior. But in reality, it makes your language more difficult to understand. Clear English can deliver your message just as accurately as jargon-filled sentences. Make sure to distinguish between essential technical terms and unnecessary jargon. If you can explain something using clear English, it will always or usually be better. And if you need to use a technical word, like my conversation last week about CSS classes on my website, make sure to explain and define what you are talking about. So my friend had to explain what a CSS class was to me, because it was a new concept. Many English learners believe that learning loads of English idioms, sayings, expressions, and phrases is the best way to become fluent and an advanced speaker. But often these sayings and phrases are boring clichés, which make a bad impression. Clichés can make communication difficult, especially if you are talking to people from other countries. And many clichés are based on old references which are now irrelevant and difficult to understand. And if you want to use powerful and creative ways to describe emotions and feelings or experiences, be innovative and make your own descriptions. A 5-year-old at the school my mum works at was practicing similes, a type of English saying, and wrote the phrase, "floating like a leaf in the wind." I had never heard this before. I think the 5-year-old had made it herself, and the image was so powerful to me. Make your English clear, precise, understandable, and creative. So, how can you avoid clichés and jargon? Well, here are 3 tips, simple tips for you to follow. First, think about the meaning of the cliché or jargon. By thinking about the meaning, you can decide alternative or simpler ways to explain what you need to communicate. Second, decide if you need the jargon or cliché. Sometimes they are completely unnecessary and can just be deleted. Third, rewrite sentences using more relevant or understandable words. If you follow these 3 tips and George Orwell's 6 rules, which I linked earlier, your English will be on the way to becoming much clearer and effective. So here is today's final thought. Today I wanted to introduce clichés and jargon, 2 of the most annoying parts of language, to all of you. By avoiding clichés and jargon in your English, you will appear more professional and be far easier to understand. As an English learner, you should be focusing on clear communication instead of filling your vocabulary full of unnecessary jargon and clichés. However, if you're a lawyer or a doctor or a nurse trying to work in another country, an English-speaking country, then of course you need to learn those technical words. But if you're just someone working in business, learn the important technical words, but also learn how to explain them to people from outside your industry. But what do you think? What is an example of a cliché or a piece of jargon you've heard before? Let me know by leaving a comment on the blog, comment on Spotify, or reach out to me on Instagram. Thinking in English Podcast is my Instagram username. I also have a YouTube channel, also called Thinking in English Podcast, where you can listen and read the transcripts and see the subtitles over on YouTube. If you really want to support Thinking in English, leave a like, rating, and review wherever you are listening right now. I've had some amazing Apple reviews recently, which is incredible, and we're getting closer and closer to 5,000 ratings on Spotify. So go and leave me a rating on Spotify if you haven't already. Thinking in English now has many ways to help you improve your English. Number 1, you can join our conversation clubs. Prices start from just $2 a week, and you can join as many conversation clubs as you want a week. Some people even join 4 a week. You can talk with people from all around the world, use new vocabulary, ask many questions, get new experiences, and become so much more confident. I've already noticed that people joining our conversation club have become much more fluent and have been able to have amazing conversations. So please join the conversation club. It's probably the best thing you can do to improve your speaking and confidence. If you want English classes, we also offer English classes every Wednesday. So if you're listening to this exactly on the day it's released, early in the morning, maybe you still have time. But every Wednesday, we do English classes run by Nathan, a CELTA qualified English teacher, aimed at intermediate, upper intermediate, and advanced level students. You have a small group with a teacher, and you really can improve your English in this setting. There's also options for one-to-one classes as well if you're interested in a private lesson. And third, we have just started workshops. So this coming Saturday, on Saturday the 4th of February, we will have a CV and resume workshop hosted by Thinking in English. So if you want to write an English resume or CV, but you don't know how, if you want to learn how to structure an English resume, the content and the kinds of vocabulary you should be using, if you want to apply for jobs in the UK or in America or Australia, join this workshop. Spaces are limited, and by joining the workshop, you get worksheets, PDFs, recorded Zoom meetings, a class, and help proofreading your CV. So join that workshop. The link is in the description under the Thinking in English classes, or you can find it on my website or on our other website, thinkinginenglish.link. And of course, there are always discounts available to Thinking in English Patreon members. Some people get free classes, everyone gets 20% off. So join the Patreon, take a class, join the workshop, listen to my podcast, and you will be on your way to fluency. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Join the Thinking in English Conversation Club right now. For just $2 a week, you can join with other English learners, practice speaking, have conversations, enjoy yourself, and use new vocabulary. We run conversation clubs every Tuesday and Thursday at 12 p.m, 6 p.m, and 9 p.m. UK time. So there's no excuse. You can join, and you should join right now. Join the Thinking in English Conversation Club, link in the description.